The first time Martha Henderson noticed the light, she dismissed it as a plane passing overhead. It was a Tuesday evening in late September, and she was closing the kitchen curtains of her two-story colonial home in Millbrook, Connecticut, when something caught her eye. A soft, pulsing glow hovered above the tree line, neither moving nor fading, casting an ethereal shimmer across the darkening sky. She paused, dish towel still in her hands, watching as the light seemed to breathe, growing brighter then dimmer in a rhythm that felt almost familiar. "Tom," she called to her husband, who was settling into his recliner with the evening news. "Come look at this." But by the time he shuffled to the window, grumbling about his aching joints, the light had vanished, leaving only the ordinary darkness of autumn in New England. Martha stared at the empty sky, wondering if her eyes were playing tricks on her. At 62, she'd noticed her vision wasn't quite what it used to be, though her recent eye exam had shown no significant changes. The next evening, it appeared again. This time, Martha was ready. She stood at the living room window just after sunset, watching the horizon with the patience of someone who had learned to wait for life's smaller mysteries to unfold. At exactly 8:47 p.m., the light emerged from behind the oak trees that bordered their property. It was larger than she'd remembered, roughly the size of a full moon, but softer, more diffused. The glow had an unusual quality, not the harsh white of an aircraft or the warm yellow of a streetlight, but something in between, with hints of blue and silver that seemed to shift and dance within its core. Before we dive deeper into this story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel. That way you'll always stay updated with our upcoming videos and continue discovering more fascinating stories. Now let's begin. Martha called Tom again, and this time he witnessed it too. They stood side by side, their shoulders touching in the familiar way of couples married for 38 years, watching the inexplicable light hover silently above their neighborhood. Tom, a retired engineer who had spent his career solving problems through logic and measurement, immediately began theorizing. "Military exercise, maybe," he muttered, adjusting his glasses. "Or one of those new drones they're always testing." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. The light's behavior defied conventional explanation. It didn't move like any aircraft he knew, and it appeared in the exact same location each night with clockwork precision. Word spread quickly through their close-knit community. Millbrook was the kind of town where everyone knew their neighbors, where morning walks included lengthy conversations over garden fences, and where unusual events became the topic of discussion at the post office and grocery store. Within a week, the mysterious light had captured the attention of nearly every resident. People began gathering in their yards each evening, some with binoculars, others with cameras, all hoping to catch a glimpse of what the local newspaper had dubbed the Millbrook phenomenon. Dr. Sarah Chen, a professor of atmospheric physics at Yale University, first heard about the light through her colleague's mother, who lived 3 streets over from the Hendersons. Initially skeptical, Dr. Chen drove up from New Haven on a Friday evening, bringing with her a graduate student and an array of scientific instruments. They set up their equipment in the town park, drawing curious onlookers who gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb whatever force might be responsible for the nightly display. At precisely 8:47 p.m., the light appeared as promised. Dr. Chen watched through her spectrometer, frowning as the readings defied her expectations. The light emitted a spectrum unlike anything she'd encountered in her 15 years of studying atmospheric phenomena. "It's not reflecting sunlight," she murmured to her student, checking and rechecking her instruments. "And it's not producing heat in the infrared range. This shouldn't be possible." The electromagnetic readings were equally puzzling. The light seemed to exist in a frequency range that registered on their equipment, but corresponded to no known natural or artificial source. As the weeks passed, the nightly appearance of the light became a ritual for the people of Millbrook. Children pressed their faces against bedroom windows, parents pointed skyward during evening walks, and elderly residents sat on their porches with blankets across their laps, watching the sky with expressions of wonder they hadn't felt since childhood. The light never moved from its position above the tree line, never varied in its timing, and never failed to appear, regardless of weather conditions. Even during the fierce thunderstorm that knocked out power to half the town, residents reported seeing the mysterious glow piercing through the storm clouds, steady and unwavering. Dr. Chen returned multiple times, each visit raising more questions than answers. She brought colleagues from Harvard and MIT, atmospheric specialists and aerospace engineers, who arrived with increasingly sophisticated equipment. They measured electromagnetic fields, analyzed spectral data, and tracked weather patterns, searching for any conventional explanation. The light remained stubbornly inexplicable. "It's as if it exists outside our normal understanding of physics," Dr. Chen admitted during a town hall meeting that drew over 300 residents. "We can observe it. We can measure some of its properties, but we cannot explain what it is or why it appears." The media attention began slowly, with a small article in the Hartford Courant, then spread to regional newspapers and local television stations. By November, Millbrook found itself thrust into an unwanted spotlight as reporters, bloggers, and curiosity seekers descended upon their quiet community. The town's single hotel filled with visitors, and residents found strangers parked along their streets each evening, cameras and phones pointed skyward. The mayor, a pragmatic woman named Joyce Whitman, tried to manage the influx while protecting her constituents' privacy, but the story had taken on a life of its own. Among the growing crowd of observers and investigators was Detective James Morrison of the Connecticut State Police, though he came to Millbrook not in any official capacity, but driven by a personal curiosity that had been eating at him for weeks. Morrison was a methodical man who had built his 22-year career on facts, evidence, and logical deduction. He didn't believe in unexplained phenomena. In his experience, there was always an explanation, even if it took time to uncover it. But the reports coming out of Millbrook had struck him as unusually credible, lacking the hysteria or attention-seeking behavior he typically associated with such claims. Morrison arrived on a cold Tuesday evening in mid-November, parking his unmarked sedan along Maple Street, where other vehicles had gathered for the nightly vigil. He introduced himself to Martha and Tom Henderson, who had become unofficial spokespersons for the phenomenon, and was struck by their genuine bewilderment. These weren't people seeking fame or fortune. They were ordinary citizens who had stumbled upon something extraordinary and didn't know what to make of it. "Detective Morrison," Martha said, offering him a thermos of coffee as they stood in her backyard. "I've lived in this house for 36 years. I've seen planes, helicopters, satellites, even the International Space Station passing overhead. This isn't any of those things." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had questioned her own sanity repeatedly over the past 2 months. "Tom thinks I'm losing my mind, though he's too polite to say so directly." Tom Henderson shook his head, his breath visible in the crisp November air. "I don't think you're losing your mind, Martha. I think we're all seeing something that shouldn't exist, and that scares me more than if you were hallucinating." He gestured toward the gathering crowd. "Look around. Half the town is here every night. We can't all be crazy." Morrison studied the assembled residents through the detective's lens he'd developed over 2 decades of police work. He saw retired teachers, small business owners, young families, and elderly couples, a cross-section of Middle America that defied any profile of mass hysteria or shared delusion. These were the people who formed the backbone of their communities, who served on school boards and volunteered at church functions, who paid their taxes and reported suspicious activity. If they said something unusual was happening, Morrison was inclined to believe them. At 8:47 p.m., the light appeared with its usual punctuality. Morrison watched through high-powered binoculars, noting details that casual observers might miss. The light maintained perfect stability, despite the 15-mile-per-hour wind that rustled the bare tree branches below it. It cast no visible beam toward the ground, yet somehow illuminated the surrounding area with a gentle radiance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Most unsettling to Morrison's orderly mind was the light's apparent awareness. Though it never moved or changed significantly, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was observing them in return. Dr. Chen approached Morrison during the observation, recognizing a kindred analytical spirit. "Detective, I'm glad you're here," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Maybe a law enforcement perspective can shed some light on this. No pun intended. I've exhausted every scientific explanation I can think of." She handed him a tablet displaying spectral analysis data. "Look at these readings. The light exists, we can measure it, but it doesn't behave according to any known principles of physics." Morrison studied the data with the same focused attention he gave to crime scene evidence. "Dr. Chen, in my line of work, when something doesn't fit the expected pattern, it usually means I'm not asking the right questions." He lowered his binoculars and turned to face her. "We're all approaching this as if it's a natural phenomenon that needs scientific explanation. What if it isn't natural? What if someone or something is deliberately creating this display?" The question hung in the cold night air, like a challenge to everything the assembled scientists and residents had assumed. Dr. Chen frowned, considering the implications. "You mean like some kind of experimental technology? Military testing?" But even as she spoke, she realized the inadequacy of such explanations. No known technology could produce the effects they were witnessing night after night. Morrison spent the following week interviewing residents, building a comprehensive timeline of the phenomenon's appearance and documenting every detail with police thoroughness. He spoke with the Hendersons repeatedly, visited other families who had witnessed the light, and compiled a database of observations that rivaled Dr. Chen's scientific measurements in its precision. What emerged was a picture of something far more complex than a simple atmospheric anomaly. Several residents mentioned experiencing vivid dreams in the weeks following the light's first appearance, dreams that were remarkably similar across different individuals. The dreams featured images of vast spaces, overwhelming loneliness, and a desperate sense of searching for something lost. Children seemed particularly affected, with parents reporting that their youngsters spoke of the sad light and asked questions about whether lights in the sky could be lonely. Emily Patterson, a third-grade teacher at Millbrook Elementary, had noticed changes in her students' behavior and artwork since the light began appearing. "Detective Morrison," she explained during their interview, "I've been teaching for 18 years, and I know how children typically respond to unusual events. They get excited, they make up stories, they compete to tell the most dramatic version. But this is different. The children seem almost protective of the light, as if they understand something about it that the adults don't." She showed Morrison a collection of drawings her students had created during art class, images that made his analytical mind struggle to find rational explanations. The drawings depicted the same basic scene, a soft glowing orb above trees, but consistently included elements that the children couldn't have observed from ground level. Some showed patterns within the light that resembled symbols or writing. Others featured additional lights in the distance, though no adult observer had reported seeing anything beyond the single phenomenon above Millbrook. Morrison found himself returning to the Hendersons' backyard each evening, drawn by questions that multiplied rather than diminished with each observation. His presence had become expected, and Martha began setting out an extra cup of coffee without being asked. The routine of watching had become a community ritual, a shared experience that bonded neighbors who had previously exchanged only polite greetings. But beneath the surface of this communal wonder, Morrison sensed something deeper, a collective intuition that the light represented more than a scientific curiosity. "Detective," Tom Henderson said one evening, as they watched the light pulse with its familiar rhythm, "do you think it's trying to communicate with us?" The question surprised Morrison, coming from the pragmatic engineer who had initially sought mechanical explanations for the phenomenon. "I know how that sounds, but Martha and I have been talking, and we both feel like it's trying to tell us something." Martha nodded, pulling her coat tighter against the December chill. "It sounds foolish, but sometimes when I watch it, I get this overwhelming sense of sadness. Not my own sadness, something else's sadness. As if the light is mourning something, or someone." She paused, looking embarrassed by her own words. "Tom thinks I'm being too emotional about it, but I can't shake the feeling." Morrison found himself nodding, though it went against every instinct of his professional training. "Mrs. Henderson, I've spent my career distinguishing between facts and feelings, evidence and intuition, but I'll admit, there's something about this light that affects people in ways that pure science can't explain." He watched the gentle pulsing above the tree line, noting how its rhythm seemed to match the cadence of a slow heartbeat. "The question is, what do we do with that feeling?" The answer to Morrison's question came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Santos, a child psychologist from Boston, arrived in Millbrook 3 days before Christmas, drawn not by scientific curiosity, but by reports that had reached the Massachusetts Department of Child Services. Several families in surrounding towns had contacted social workers concerned about their children's unusual behavior and obsessive interest in what they called the lonely light. Dr. Santos specialized in trauma counseling for children and had seen how external events could trigger deep psychological responses in young minds. What she found in Millbrook challenged her professional understanding of how children processed unexplained experiences. Unlike typical responses to frightening or confusing events, the children in the community showed no signs of anxiety or distress related to the light. Instead, they displayed an almost protective concern, speaking about it with the same care they might show for an injured animal or a sad friend. Dr. Santos spent her first morning interviewing families, beginning with the Hendersons' neighbors, the Kowalski family. 8-year-old Michael Kowalski had been having the dreams that other children reported, dreams of vast empty spaces and profound loneliness. But his parents were concerned because he had begun asking to stay up past his bedtime to keep the light company. His younger sister, 6-year-old Anna, had drawn dozens of pictures featuring not just the light, but detailed scenes of what appeared to be other worlds, other skies, with similar glowing orbs hovering above alien landscapes. "Doctor Santos," explained their mother, Lisa Kowalski, "Anna has never shown any interest in science fiction or fantasy. She's always been focused on realistic things, dolls, horses, everyday activities. But ever since the light appeared, she's been drawing these incredible scenes that seem to come from somewhere else entirely. And the detail in them, it's beyond what I would expect from a 6-year-old. The drawings were indeed remarkable. Anna had rendered distant planets with multiple moons, cities that seemed to float among clouds, and always, the gentle lights hovering above them like guardians or sentinels. But most striking were the expressions on the faces of the small figures she included in her scenes, children looking up at the lights with expressions of understanding and compassion that seemed far beyond her years. Doctor. Santos interviewed 12 children ranging in age from 5 to 14, and the consistency of their responses was unprecedented in her experience. Without prompting, they all described feeling that the light was sad or lonely. They spoke about wanting to help it, to let it know that people cared about it. Several mentioned dreams of traveling to places where many such lights existed, but where something terrible had happened that left them isolated and searching. "It's looking for its family," explained 10-year-old Sarah Martinez, with the matter-of-fact certainty that children sometimes possess about things adults find incomprehensible. "All the other lights went away, and now it's all by itself. It comes here every night because it's hoping they might find it, but it doesn't know how to call to them from so far away." Dr. Santos found herself taking notes that read more like poetry than clinical observations. The children's descriptions contained a consistent narrative that none of them could have coordinated. The light was not from Earth, it had become separated from others of its kind, and it was using its nightly appearances to send some form of signal across impossible distances. What unsettled Dr. Santos most was not the fantastical nature of these claims, but the profound emotional maturity with which the children expressed their certainty. She arranged to meet with Detective Morrison and Dr. Chen at the town library the following afternoon. Sharing her findings with two people she hoped might provide rational perspective on what she was experiencing. The three sat in the children's section, surrounded by picture books and small chairs, discussing phenomena that challenged the foundations of their respective professional worldviews. Detective Morrison, Dr. Chen, Dr. Santos began, organizing her notes on one of the low tables. "I need to tell you what these children are describing, but I want you to understand that I'm reporting their consistent responses, not endorsing their interpretation." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "According to 12 different children, all describing independent experiences, the light is not a natural phenomenon or human technology. They believe it's a form of communication from something that is lost and trying to find its way home." Dr. Chen leaned forward, her scientific skepticism warring with the respect she had developed for the inexplicable readings her instruments produced each night. "Dr. Santos, children often create imaginative explanations for things they don't understand. It's a normal developmental response to mystery or fear." "That's exactly what I expected to find," Dr. Santos replied. "But that's not what's happening here. These children show no fear, and their explanations aren't wild fantasies. They're detailed, consistent, and accompanied by genuine emotional concern. They're not creating stories to cope with something frightening. They're responding to something they believe needs help." Morrison had been studying Anna Kowalski's drawings, spread across the small table like a child's atlas of impossible worlds. "Doctor Santos, in my experience, when multiple witnesses provide consistent testimony about events they couldn't have coordinated, it suggests they're observing something real, even if we don't understand what it is." He held up one of the drawings, showing a light hovering above what appeared to be a crystalline city. These images contain details that suggest genuine visual experience, not imagination. The three professionals sat in silence for several minutes, each grappling with implications that stretched beyond their training and expertise. The afternoon sun slanted through the library windows, casting ordinary shadows that seemed somehow insufficient to contain the extraordinary conclusions they were approaching. Dr. Chen finally broke the silence. "If we entertain the possibility that the children's interpretation has some basis in reality, and I'm not saying we should, but if we do, then we're discussing the first confirmed evidence of intelligence from beyond Earth, appearing not as dramatic revelation, but as a desperate call for help that only children seem capable of understanding." The weight of that possibility settled over them like a physical presence. Morrison thought about his years of police work, the missing persons cases that had shaped his understanding of loss and searching. Dr. Santos considered the children's drawings and their consistent expressions of empathy for something they couldn't rationally understand. Dr. Chen reviewed her spectral data with new eyes, looking for patterns that might represent intentional communication rather than random phenomena. "There's another aspect to consider, Doctor." Santos continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper in the quiet library. "Several of the children have mentioned that the light's sadness is getting stronger. They say it's becoming more desperate, more lonely. Anna Kowalski told her mother yesterday that she's worried the light might disappear if it doesn't find what it's looking for soon." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather. "Dr. Santos, are the children suggesting that this entity might give up, that it might stop trying to communicate?" "That's their concern," she confirmed, "and frankly, it's becoming mine as well. If there's even a remote possibility that we're witnessing first contact with intelligence from beyond Earth, and if that intelligence is in distress, then our response becomes a matter of unprecedented importance." Outside the library windows, the short winter day was fading toward evening. Soon people would begin gathering in yards and parks across Millbrook, preparing for another night of watching the mysterious light. But now, 3 professionals trained in logic and evidence found themselves contemplating the possibility that the children of their community had intuited a truth that adult reasoning had missed, that the light above their small town was not a phenomenon to be studied, but a conscious being to be helped. As they prepared to leave the library, Dr. Chen made a decision that surprised even herself. "Detective Morrison, Dr. Santos, I want to try something tonight that goes against every principle of scientific methodology I've been taught. I want to see what happens if we respond to the light as if it really is trying to communicate." That evening, as the sun set behind the bare winter trees of Millbrook, 3 professionals who had built their careers on empirical evidence prepared to conduct an experiment that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality. Dr. Chen had spent the afternoon reviewing her spectral analysis equipment, not to study the light as a passive observer, but to determine if her instruments might be capable of generating responses in the same frequency ranges the mysterious phenomenon produced. The Hendersons had graciously offered their backyard as the staging area for what Dr. Chen privately thought of as either a breakthrough in human understanding or the most elaborate act of professional suicide she could imagine. Martha Henderson busied herself preparing hot chocolate and coffee for the larger crowd that had gathered. Sensing that this night would be different from the routine observations they had grown accustomed to, Detective Morrison had invited the families with children who had shown the strongest response to the light, reasoning that if the youngsters truly possessed some intuitive understanding of the phenomenon, their presence might be crucial to any attempt at communication. The Kowalskis arrived with Michael and Anna, followed by the Martinez family with 10-year-old Sarah, and several other families whose children had been drawing pictures and having dreams about the lonely light. Dr. Santos positioned herself where she could observe both the children's behavior and the light simultaneously, her training in child psychology having taught her to recognize subtle changes in behavior that adults might miss. She carried a notebook, but found herself wondering if conventional documentation would be adequate for whatever they were about to experience. At 8:30 p.m., 15 minutes before the light's usual appearance time, Dr. Chen activated her modified spectrometer. Instead of passive observation, she had programmed it to emit carefully structured electromagnetic pulses in the same frequency range that the light produced. The pulses followed a simple mathematical progression. Prime numbers, then the Fibonacci sequence, then a basic binary representation of the hydrogen atom's frequency. If intelligence guided the light, Dr. Chen reasoned, it might recognize these universal mathematical concepts, regardless of its origin. The children gathered naturally in a semicircle facing the tree line where the light would appear, their parents standing behind them with expressions that mixed hope, skepticism, and protective concern. Anna Kowalski clutched her latest drawing, a picture of many lights arranged in what appeared to be a constellation or formation, with lines connecting them as if showing relationships or communication paths. "Doctor." "Chen," Martha Henderson whispered, approaching with steaming cups of hot chocolate. "I don't pretend to understand what you're trying to do, but I want you to know that Tom and I support this completely. If there's even a chance that something out there needs help, then we have an obligation to try." At exactly 8:47 p.m., the light appeared with its familiar punctuality, but something was immediately different. Instead of its usual steady pulsing, the light flickered rapidly for several seconds, then settled into a new rhythm that seemed to match the mathematical sequences Dr. Chen had transmitted. The assembled crowd fell silent, parents instinctively drawing their children closer while simultaneously leaning forward to better observe the unprecedented change in the light's behavior. Dr. Chen's equipment registered responses that made her question her own readings. The light was not simply reflecting or mimicking her transmissions, it was responding with increasingly complex mathematical progressions that built upon the concepts she had introduced. Prime numbers became prime number pairs, the Fibonacci sequence extended beyond her original transmission, and the hydrogen atom representation was followed by helium, lithium, and other elements in perfect atomic progression. "It's answering," Dr. Chen whispered, her voice filled with wonder and terror. "It understands the mathematical concepts, and it's expanding on them. This is intentional communication with an intelligence that grasps advanced mathematics." The children had moved closer to the tree line, their faces turned upward with expressions of joy and relief that struck their parents as both beautiful and unsettling. Anna Kowalski began speaking in a clear, carrying voice. "We understand that you're lonely. We want to help you find your family. Can you show us how?" What happened next defied every expectation the adults had formed. The light began to move for the first time since its initial appearance, tracing patterns in the sky above the trees. The movements were deliberate and geometric, creating shapes that lingered as afterimages before fading. Dr. Santos recognized some of the patterns from the children's drawings, constellation-like arrangements that suggested multiple lights in formation. Sarah Martinez stepped forward, her small voice confident in the winter darkness. "You're showing us where your family went, aren't you? They're in different places now, and you can't reach them from here." The light paused in its movements, pulsed 3 times in rapid succession, then resumed tracing patterns that became increasingly complex and beautiful. Morrison watched through his binoculars as the light created what appeared to be a 3-dimensional map in the sky, using different intensities and positions to suggest depth and distance. The patterns showed clusters of lights connected by flowing lines, with one light, presumably the one hovering above Millbrook, isolated from the others by what appeared to be vast, empty space. "Doctor." Chen's instruments were recording electromagnetic signatures, unlike anything in scientific literature. But more importantly, she was witnessing communication between human children and something that originated beyond Earth's atmosphere. The children continued to speak to the light with the same natural ease they would use to comfort a frightened animal, asking questions and interpreting the patterns of response with an intuitive understanding that left the adults speechless. "You've been separated for a long time," Michael Kowalski said, his 8-year-old voice carrying surprising maturity. You've been calling to them every night, hoping they would hear you and come back. But they can't hear you because you're too far away, and you don't know how to make your voice carry across all that distance. The light's response was immediate and profound. Its glow intensified to nearly daylight brightness for several seconds, then dimmed to a soft radiance that seemed to pulse in rhythm with collective human heartbeats. The electromagnetic readings on Dr. Chen's equipment showed patterns that resembled brainwave activity, complex, organized, and undeniably indicative of consciousness processing emotion. Dr. Santos found herself crying without fully understanding why, overwhelmed by the realization that she was witnessing the first conversation between humanity and an intelligence from beyond Earth. A conversation initiated not by scientists or government officials, but by children responding to another being's loneliness with instinctive compassion. As the evening progressed, the light continued its sky mapping display, while the children asked questions and provided commentary that helped the adults understand what they were witnessing. The entity above Millbrook was indeed separated from others of its kind, had been trying to signal across impossible distances, and had chosen their small town as a communication point because something about the location made its transmissions clearer. "The question now," Detective Morrison said quietly to Dr. Chen and Dr. Santos, "is what do we do with this information? How do we help something that exists on a scale we can barely comprehend?" The answer would come from an unexpected source, but first, the people of Millbrook would need to grapple with the reality that their quiet community had become the focal point for humanity's first confirmed contact with intelligence from among the stars. Intelligence that had reached out not with advanced technology or cosmic wisdom, but with the universal language of loneliness and the need for connection that transcended species and solar systems. Word of the communication breakthrough spread through Millbrook within hours, despite the participants' agreement to keep the events quiet until they could understand their implications. By the following morning, every resident seemed aware that something extraordinary had occurred, and the atmosphere in the town carried a mixture of excitement, apprehension, and profound responsibility. Detective Morrison had spent the night documenting everything he had witnessed, writing reports that he knew would challenge the credibility he had built over 2 decades of police work. But the evidence was undeniable. Multiple witnesses, recorded electromagnetic data, and video documentation that showed the light responding directly to human communication attempts. He found himself facing a decision that would define not only his career, but potentially humanity's first steps into a larger universe. Dr. Chen had remained in the Hendersons' backyard until nearly dawn, continuing to record and analyze the light's communications. The mathematical progressions had evolved throughout the night, growing in complexity until they resembled advanced equations in theoretical physics. Most remarkably, the entity had begun incorporating constants and relationships that human science was only beginning to understand, suggesting a level of knowledge that far exceeded Earth's current capabilities. Dr. Santos had driven back to Boston in the early morning hours, her mind reeling with implications that stretched beyond child psychology into realms of anthropology, philosophy, and ethics that she felt unprepared to address. The children's natural ability to communicate with the entity raised questions about human consciousness, intuitive knowledge, and the possibility that children possessed forms of understanding that adults had forgotten or suppressed. The 3 professionals reconvened at the Millbrook Town Hall at noon, joining Mayor Joyce Whitman in a meeting that none of them could have imagined attending when they first arrived in the small Connecticut community. The mayor, a pragmatic woman who had managed the town through economic difficulties and natural disasters, found herself facing a situation that no crisis management manual had ever addressed. Dr. Chen, Detective Morrison, Dr. Santos, Mayor Whitman began, her voice steady despite the unprecedented nature of their discussion. I need to understand exactly what occurred last night, and more importantly, what our responsibilities are going forward. This community has been thrust into a situation that affects not just Millbrook, but potentially all of humanity. Dr. Chen presented her data first, explaining the mathematical communications and electromagnetic signatures that provided objective evidence of intelligence and intentional response. Mayor Whitman, we documented clear evidence of advanced mathematical understanding, including concepts in theoretical physics that suggest knowledge far beyond current human capabilities. This is not natural phenomena or human technology. We are dealing with intelligence of extraterrestrial origin. Detective Morrison followed with his observational report, emphasizing the consistency of witness testimony and the organized nature of the entity's responses. Mayor, in my professional opinion, we have established first contact with intelligence from beyond Earth. The entity has demonstrated consciousness, mathematical knowledge, and most importantly, emotional distress. It has specifically requested assistance in reconnecting with others of its kind. Dr. Santos added her psychological assessment, focusing on the children's role as intermediaries and their consistent interpretation of the entity's needs. The children understand aspects of this communication that adult reasoning seems to miss. Their emotional responses and intuitive interpretations have proven more accurate than our scientific instruments in understanding the entity's intentions. Mayor Whitman absorbed the information with the careful attention she had learned to apply to complex municipal issues, but the implications stretched far beyond local governance. The question before us, she said finally, is whether Millbrook has the right to make decisions that affect all of humanity, and whether we have the obligation to involve federal authorities who might not share our community's approach to this contact. The debate that followed touched on fundamental questions of democracy, representation, and humanity's preparedness for contact with intelligence from beyond Earth. Morrison argued for maintaining local control, reasoning that the entity had specifically chosen Millbrook, and that federal involvement might destroy the delicate communication that had been established. Dr. Chen worried about the scientific implications of proceeding without proper institutional oversight. Dr. Santos focused on protecting the children who had become crucial intermediaries in the communication process. Their discussion was interrupted by Martha Henderson, who knocked on the town hall door with news that changed the trajectory of their debate. Mayor Whitman, Martha said, her voice tight with urgency, you need to come outside. The children are gathering again, and they're saying that the light has been trying to communicate during the day, but we haven't been listening. The group hurried outside to find nearly 50 children from Millbrook and surrounding communities assembled in the town park. They had come on their own, many walking or riding bicycles, drawn by some collective understanding that the adults couldn't comprehend. The children stood in organized groups, their faces turned toward the sky where, despite the bright afternoon sunlight, a subtle shimmer was visible above the tree line. Hannah Kowalski approached Mayor Whitman with the confidence of a child who had been chosen for an important task. Mayor Whitman, she said in her clear 6-year-old voice, the light has been trying to talk to us all day, but grown-ups can't see it when the sun is shining. It's scared because more people are coming who want to hurt it or take it away. It wants to know if we'll help it call to its family before the scary people get here. The implications struck the adults simultaneously. News of the previous night's events had clearly traveled beyond Millbrook, and federal agencies would inevitably become involved. The entity somehow understood this development and was appealing directly to the community that had first responded with compassion rather than analysis. Dr. Chen immediately activated her portable equipment, confirming that the daytime electromagnetic signatures were present but subtle, easily overwhelmed by solar radiation and atmospheric interference. The children's ability to perceive the communications during daylight hours suggested sensory capabilities that adults had either lost or never possessed. Sarah Martinez stepped forward to join Anna, her 10-year-old voice carrying surprising authority. The light says it knows how to make its voice stronger, strong enough to reach its family across all the empty space between here and where they are. But it needs us to help, because it can't do it alone. It needs people who care about it to make the connection work. Mayor Whitman found herself facing a decision that no elected official in human history had ever confronted. A community of children was reporting that an intelligence from beyond Earth needed assistance with interstellar communication, and that assistance needed to be provided before federal authorities arrived to potentially disrupt or co-opt the contact. "Children," she said, kneeling to address them at eye level, "are you saying that this light, this being from somewhere else, needs our help to call its family, and that we need to help it soon?" The children nodded with unanimous certainty, their faces reflecting a mixture of excitement and responsibility that struck the adults as both inspiring and overwhelming. Michael Kowalski spoke for the group. "Mayor Whitman, it's been alone for so long and it's getting weaker because loneliness makes it hard to keep trying. If we help it now, tonight, it can send a strong enough signal that its family will hear and come looking. But if we wait, it might become too weak to call anymore." The weight of the moment settled over Mayor Whitman like a physical presence. She was being asked to authorize the first intentional attempt by humanity to facilitate communication across interstellar distances based on the word of children and the evidence of phenomena that challenged scientific understanding. The decision would define not only her legacy as mayor, but potentially humanity's first steps into a cosmic community that had existed beyond their awareness. "Dr. Chen," Mayor Whitman said, turning to the physicist with deliberate calm, "if we proceed with helping this entity communicate with its family, what are the risks to our community? What are the risks to Earth?" Dr. Chen considered the question with the thoroughness that had characterized her scientific career. "Mayor, based on the entity's behavior and communications, it appears to be in distress rather than aggressive. Its mathematical sophistication suggests advanced intelligence, but its emotional responses indicate benevolent intentions. The greatest risk may be in not helping. If this represents first contact, our response will establish humanity's character for any future interactions." Detective Morrison added his law enforcement perspective. "Mayor, I've spent my career assessing threats and intentions. This entity has had the power to affect our community for months, but has shown no hostile behavior. It chose to reveal itself gradually, to communicate through our children, and to ask for help rather than demand compliance. These are not the actions of a threat." Dr. Santos focused on the children, who waited with patient determination that seemed beyond their years. "Mayor Whitman, these children are demonstrating a form of empathy and understanding that represents the best of human nature. If we deny them the chance to help someone or something in need, we risk teaching them that compassion has limits based on difference or origin." Mayor Whitman looked at the assembled children, then at the three professionals who had become unlikely advisors in humanity's first extraterrestrial diplomatic crisis. Above them, the afternoon sky held a shimmer that most adults couldn't see, but that 50 children perceived as a desperate call for help from unimaginable distances. "Very well," she said, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would echo through history. "We will help. Dr. Chen, what do you need to amplify the entity's communication capabilities? Detective Morrison, can you coordinate with local authorities to ensure our safety while maintaining secrecy Until this attempt is complete, Dr. Santos, will you work with the children to facilitate whatever form of communication they've established? The next several hours transformed Millbrook into the staging ground for humanity's first intentional interstellar communication project. Dr. Chen worked with colleagues at Yale to access more powerful electromagnetic equipment, officially requesting it for atmospheric research, while privately knowing she was facilitating first contact. Detective Morrison coordinated with state and local police to establish a security perimeter around the town, ostensibly for crowd control, but actually to prevent federal intervention until the communication attempt was complete. Dr. Santos gathered the children in the elementary school gymnasium, where they shared their understanding of the entity's needs and worked together to prepare for the evening's effort. The children's drawings and descriptions revealed a complex picture of the entity's origin and current situation. It was part of a collective consciousness that had been exploring the galaxy, but had become separated from its group during some form of cosmic event that scattered them across vast distances. As evening approached, the entire community of Millbrook prepared for an event that none of them fully understood, but all felt compelled to support. Families gathered in the town park with blankets and thermos bottles, creating an atmosphere that resembled a community festival more than humanity's first attempt at interstellar diplomacy. The children took their positions near Dr. Chen's enhanced equipment, their faces reflecting excitement, determination, and a profound sense of responsibility. At sunset, Dr. Chen activated the most powerful electromagnetic transmission array that had ever been assembled outside of major research institutions. The equipment, borrowed from Yale and 3 other universities under emergency research provisions, filled the town park with humming devices that could transmit signals across the electromagnetic spectrum with unprecedented clarity and power. The children positioned themselves in the semicircle they had naturally formed during previous communications, their hands linked in an instinctive gesture of connection and support. Detective Morrison established observation posts around the perimeter, coordinating with local law enforcement to document the event while protecting the participants from potential federal interference. He had made the difficult decision to delay reporting the situation to higher authorities until after the communication attempt, reasoning that humanity's first contact should be guided by compassion rather than protocol. Dr. Santos moved among the children, marveling at their calm focus and mature understanding of the magnitude of their undertaking. They spoke about the entity with the same protective concern they might show for a lost pet or frightened friend, seemingly unaware that they were participating in the most significant moment in human history. Their innocence and empathy had become humanity's greatest assets in establishing peaceful contact with intelligence from beyond Earth. As 8:47 p.m. approached, the assembled crowd of nearly 300 residents fell silent, their attention focused on the tree line where the entity would appear. The children began speaking softly, their voices blending in words of encouragement and welcome that seemed to resonate with frequencies beyond normal hearing. Martha Henderson, standing with Tom near the equipment array, felt tears on her cheeks as she realized that their quiet community had become the birthplace of humanity's cosmic awakening. The light appeared with intensified brilliance, immediately responding to the enhanced transmission capabilities with patterns of movement and color that painted complex geometries across the darkening sky. Dr. Chen's instruments registered electromagnetic signatures that exceeded her equipment's measurement capabilities, indicating that the entity was utilizing the additional power to transmit signals of unprecedented strength and clarity. The children's communication became more animated and urgent as they interpreted the entity's responses. Anna Kowalski stepped forward, her 6-year-old voice carrying across the silent park. "It says the strong signal is working. Its family can hear it now, and they're starting to answer from very far away. But it needs us to keep helping because the connection is still weak. Sarah Martinez added her voice to the interpretation. There are many of them scattered across different places, and they've been looking for each other for a very long time. Our light is the first one to find a way to call strongly enough for the others to hear. It's like lighting a beacon that they can follow home. The light's movements became increasingly complex and beautiful, creating patterns that resembled musical notation written in electromagnetic energy across the sky. The entity was clearly utilizing every aspect of Dr. Chen's enhanced equipment to transmit signals that traveled beyond the solar system, calling to others of its kind with a voice strengthened by human technology and compassion. Dr. Chen watched her instruments with wonder and terror as they registered incoming responses from sources that defied astronomical understanding. The signals came from multiple directions and vast distances, suggesting that the entity's family was scattered across the galaxy, but was indeed receiving and responding to the enhanced transmissions. "Mayor Whitman," she called out, her voice tight with excitement. "We're receiving responses from at least 12 different sources. The entity's communication is working. Its family is answering." The crowd in the park erupted in spontaneous cheering and applause as the implications became clear. They had successfully facilitated the first interstellar family reunion in human experience, helping to reconnect beings who had been separated across cosmic distances. The children beamed with pride and joy, their intuitive understanding vindicated by the success of their compassionate intervention. But the celebration was interrupted by the arrival of unmarked vehicles at the town's perimeter. Detective Morrison's radio crackled with reports from his observation posts. Federal agents were establishing a containment perimeter around Millbrook, with instructions to secure the area and detain key participants in what they termed a potential national security incident. Morrison approached Mayor Whitman with grim urgency. "Mayor, federal agencies have arrived in force. They're treating this as a potential threat rather than a diplomatic contact. We have perhaps 15 minutes before they breach our perimeter and attempt to seize control of the situation." The children, still linked in their communication circle, seemed to sense the approaching danger without being told. Michael Kowalski spoke with adult-level seriousness. "The light is scared again. It says the scary people are coming to try to capture it or hurt it. Its family is still very far away, and if the scary people stop us from helping, it might not be able to keep calling to them." Mayor Whitman faced the most critical decision of her life. Federal intervention would likely end the communication attempt and potentially damage humanity's first peaceful contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. But continuing to facilitate the contact would place her community in direct conflict with national authorities, who had the power to arrest everyone involved. "Dr. Chen," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation, "how much more time does the entity need to establish stable contact with its family?" Dr. Chen consulted her instruments, noting the strengthening response signals from distant sources. "Based on the signal patterns, I estimate another 30 to 45 minutes for the entity to establish reliable two-way communication with all responding sources. After that, it should be able to maintain contact without our assistance." "Then we continue," Mayor Whitman declared, her decision carrying the authority of elected leadership and the moral weight of humanity's cosmic responsibility. "Detective Morrison, can your people delay federal access for another hour?" Morrison nodded grimly, understanding that he was potentially ending his law enforcement career, but knowing that some decisions transcended personal consequences. "We can create bureaucratic delays and jurisdictional confusion for perhaps an hour. After that, they'll have legal authority to override local control." The next 45 minutes became the most intense and significant period in Millbrook's history, as the small community continued to facilitate interstellar communication while federal agents worked to penetrate their protective barriers. The children maintained their communication with unwavering focus, interpreting increasingly complex exchanges between the entity and its distant family members. Dr. Chen's equipment registered the establishment of stable communication links across multiple cosmic distances, with signal strength and clarity that suggested the entity would soon be able to maintain contact without human assistance. The electromagnetic patterns became increasingly synchronized, indicating that the scattered family members were coordinating their responses and beginning to plan their reunion. As the communication reached its climax, the light above Millbrook began to pulse in perfect synchronization with similar lights that became visible across the night sky, dozens of distant points of radiance that appeared briefly as the entity's family responded from across the galaxy. For a few magical minutes, the people of Millbrook witnessed a cosmic celebration of reunion that spanned impossible distances and united consciousnesses that had been isolated for eons. The final phase of the communication brought revelations that transformed humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. As the entity's connection with its family stabilized, the children began reporting information that challenged every assumption about extraterrestrial intelligence and cosmic civilization. The beings communicating through the light above Millbrook were not explorers or conquerors, but refugees, survivors of a cosmic catastrophe that had scattered their collective consciousness across the galaxy. Anna Kowalski, her young voice now serving as humanity's primary translator for interstellar dialogue, shared the entity's story with growing amazement. "They're not from one planet like us," she explained to the assembled crowd, her 6-year-old vocabulary struggling with concepts beyond human experience. "They're like thoughts that can travel between stars. They used to all be together in a big family of lights, but something terrible happened that blew them apart, and they've been floating alone in the dark for longer than people have existed on Earth." Sarah Martinez added her interpretation, her 10-year-old understanding somehow encompassing philosophical complexities that challenged adult comprehension. "They don't have bodies like us, but they think and feel just like people do. They get lonely and scared and happy, and they love their family just like we love ours. The terrible thing that happened was when their home, not a planet, but like a place made of light, was destroyed by something they call the Great Scattering." Dr. Chen's instruments recorded the entity's attempts to convey visual information, producing images on her monitoring screens that depicted cosmic events of unimaginable scale and beauty. The entity's family had once existed as a unified consciousness spanning entire star systems, their light-based forms traveling freely through space and time. But a cosmic catastrophe, possibly involving colliding galaxies or the death of a massive star, had dispersed them across distances so vast that individual members had lost contact with the collective for millions of years. The entity above Millbrook had been searching for its family throughout that time, traveling from star system to star system, hoping to find others who had survived the scattering. Earth's location near several cosmic communication corridors had made it an ideal place to establish a beacon, but the entity had needed help from conscious beings to amplify its signal sufficiently to reach across galactic distances. Detective Morrison, monitoring federal communications through his radio, realized that the approaching agents had no understanding of the diplomatic magnitude of the situation they were about to disrupt. The entity and its family represented not a threat to Earth, but humanity's first contact with a cosmic civilization based on principles of consciousness and compassion rather than technology and conquest. Mayor Whitman, Morrison said urgently. "The federal teams are treating this as a potential invasion scenario. They're bringing equipment designed to contain or destroy the entity, not to communicate with it. If they succeed in their containment efforts, we could be responsible for humanity's first act of cosmic violence against peaceful beings seeking only to reunite with their family." The children, still maintaining their communication link, sensed the approaching danger and began speaking with increased urgency. Michael Kowalski's 8-year-old voice carried wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. "The lights are saying goodbye to us. They know the scary people are coming, and they don't want us to get hurt trying to protect them. They want to thank us for helping them find each other again." The light above Millbrook began to pulse with patterns that conveyed unmistakable gratitude and affection, its electromagnetic communications registering on Dr. Chen's equipment as complex mathematical expressions that resolved into concepts of love, appreciation, and eternal friendship. The entity was saying farewell, but also offering something unexpected, an invitation for humanity to join a cosmic community of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. "They're asking if some of us want to come with them," Anna Kowalski announced, her voice filled with wonder and longing. "Not our bodies, but our thoughts and feelings. They can teach people how to travel as light between the stars, to see all the beautiful places in the galaxy, and meet other families of lights who live among the stars." The offer represented an opportunity that humanity had never imagined: direct participation in a galactic civilization based on consciousness rather than technology, exploration through mental projection rather than physical travel. But it also meant leaving behind everything familiar, everything that defined human existence on Earth. Several of the children began speaking at once, their voices blending as they interpreted the entity's final communications. The beings were offering to establish a permanent communication link with Earth, allowing for ongoing contact and eventual invitation for humanity to join their cosmic family. But first, they needed to escape before federal forces arrived with technology designed to contain or harm them. Dr. Chen watched her instruments register the approach of additional light entities from across the galaxy, their responses to the amplified beacon growing stronger as family members began to converge on Earth's location. "Mayor Whitman, we're seeing the arrival of at least 20 similar entities in the outer solar system. The family reunion is happening, but it's happening here near Earth." The implications struck everyone simultaneously. Humanity's assistance in facilitating the reunion had transformed Earth into a gathering point for cosmic consciousness, potentially the most significant location in human history. But federal forces were approaching with orders to contain or eliminate what they perceived as an extraterrestrial threat. Mayor Whitman made her final decision with the weight of cosmic diplomacy resting on her shoulders. "Dr. Chen, can you record a message from our community to these beings? Something that explains humanity's intentions and our hope for peaceful contact." She turned to the children, who had become inadvertent ambassadors for their species. "Children, can you ask them to remember us kindly and to judge all of humanity by the compassion you've shown tonight?" The children's response was immediate and unanimous. They began speaking words of friendship and hope, their voices combining in a message that transcended language barriers and species differences. They told the entities about human families, about love and loss, about dreams and fears, about the beauty of Earth and the kindness that existed in human hearts despite the fear and violence that sometimes dominated human behavior. The light above Millbrook responded with patterns of such beauty and complexity that even the adults felt their hearts lift with joy and wonder. The entity was accepting their message, recording their words and emotions, promising to share them with the cosmic family that was even now gathering in Earth's vicinity. As federal vehicles breached the town's perimeter and armed agents prepared to establish control over the situation, the children of Millbrook completed humanity's first successful diplomatic contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Their compassion had bridged the gap between species, their empathy had facilitated cosmic reunion, and their innocence had established Earth's reputation among the stars as a world capable of kindness toward beings different from themselves. The final moments of the Millbrook contact unfolded with the dramatic intensity of humanity's childhood ending and its cosmic adolescence beginning. Federal agents established a perimeter around the town park just as the entity above the tree line began its farewell sequence, pulsing with patterns that painted the entire sky in shifting colors of gratitude and affection. Dr. Chen's instruments recorded electromagnetic signatures that would take scientists decades to fully understand, while the children of Millbrook translated the entity's final messages with tears of joy and sadness mixing on their faces. Agent Patricia Williams of the Department of Homeland Security approached Mayor Whitman with orders to immediately cease all communication attempts and evacuate the area for national security containment procedures. She carried authorization from the highest levels of government to treat the situation as a potential extraterrestrial invasion, with protocols designed to capture or neutralize the anomalous phenomenon. But as she witnessed the peaceful gathering of families, the obvious joy of the children, and the benevolent behavior of the entity they were communicating with, Williams found herself questioning orders that seemed catastrophically inappropriate for the situation. "Mayor Whitman," Agent Williams said, her voice carrying the authority of federal law enforcement but tempered by growing uncertainty, "I have orders to establish containment and terminate any unauthorized contact with the anomalous entity. But what I'm observing here doesn't match the threat assessment I was briefed on. Can you explain what's actually happening?" Mayor Whitman, flanked by Dr. Chen, Detective Morrison, and Dr. Santos, faced the federal agent with the dignity of someone who had just facilitated humanity's first peaceful contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. "Agent Williams, what you're witnessing is the successful completion of first contact between Earth and a cosmic civilization based on consciousness and compassion. These beings needed our help to reunite with family members scattered across the galaxy, and our community chose to provide that assistance." The children, still linked in their communication circle, continued their dialogue with the entity, even as federal agents established positions around the park. Anna Kowalski's voice carried clearly across the tension-filled scene. "They're saying goodbye now, but they want everyone to know that they'll remember Earth as the place where people helped them find their family. They're going to tell all the other light families in the galaxy about the kind people who live here." Agent Williams listened to the child's words while observing the entity's behavior through military-grade optical equipment. The phenomenon showed no signs of aggression, made no threatening movements, and appeared to be responding to human communication with genuine affection and gratitude. Her training had prepared her for containment of hostile forces, not for diplomatic contact with peaceful beings seeking assistance. Dr. Chen approached Agent Williams with printouts of the electromagnetic data she had recorded throughout the evening. "Agent Williams, I need you to understand what we've accomplished here. This entity demonstrated advanced mathematical knowledge, responded to our communication attempts, and used our assistance to establish contact with others of its kind across galactic distances. This is first contact, and it has been entirely peaceful and beneficial." The entity above the tree line began to rise slowly, its light growing more intense as it prepared to join the other members of its family that Dr. Chen's equipment showed gathering in the outer solar system. The children waved goodbye with expressions of joy mixed with sadness. their young faces reflecting the profound emotional connection they had established with a being from among the stars. Sarah Martinez spoke for the group of children as they watched their cosmic friend prepare to leave. It's not really goodbye forever. They're going to set up a special place where they can all live together again, somewhere safe where the great scattering can't hurt them anymore. And they promise to come back sometimes to visit Earth and see how we're doing. The light's final communication came in the form of a gift that transformed the night sky above Millbrook into a canvas of impossible beauty. The entity projected images of its family's reunion, showing dozens of light beings converging from across the galaxy to embrace in patterns of radiance that painted aurora-like colors across the entire visible sky. The display was visible for hundreds of miles, inspiring wonder and awe in millions of people who had no idea they were witnessing humanity's first successful extraterrestrial diplomatic achievement. Agent Williams found herself crying as she watched the cosmic reunion unfold above her head, realizing that her orders to contain or neutralize the phenomenon would have prevented one of the most beautiful and significant events in human history. She made a decision that would reshape government policy toward extraterrestrial contact for generations to come. "Stand down," she commanded her team through her radio. "This is not a threat situation. We are witnessing peaceful first contact, and our mission parameters are inappropriate for the situation. I'm ordering a full withdrawal to allow the completion of this historic communication." The federal agents stepped back from their containment positions, joining the residents of Millbrook in watching the entity's departure. The light above the tree line pulsed one final time with such intensity that it was visible in daylight across most of the eastern United States, then rose swiftly toward the stars, where it joined with dozens of other lights in a formation that resembled a constellation of pure joy. Dr. Chen's instruments tracked the family of entities as they moved beyond the solar system, their combined electromagnetic signature creating a beacon of consciousness that would be detectable by humanity's radio telescopes for decades to come. The beings were establishing their new home in a location that would allow for ongoing communication with Earth, fulfilling their promise to maintain contact with the world that had helped them find each other. In the months that followed, the events at Millbrook were investigated by every major scientific institution on Earth. The electromagnetic data, witness testimonies, and video documentation provided irrefutable evidence of peaceful contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. The children who had served as intermediaries became the focus of intensive but respectful study as scientists attempted to understand their intuitive communication abilities. Dr. Chen was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for her documentation of the first confirmed extraterrestrial contact, but she insisted that the award be shared with the children of Millbrook, whose compassion had made the communication possible. Dr. Santos established a new field of study focused on children's roles in interspecies communication, while Detective Morrison became the first director of the United Nations Office for Extraterrestrial Relations. The entity's family established their promised communication beacon in a star system 47 light-years from Earth, sending regular messages of friendship and cosmic news that expanded humanity's understanding of galactic civilization. Other families of light beings, inspired by the story of the Millbrook reunion, began making contact with civilizations throughout the galaxy, creating a network of consciousness-based communication that spanned vast distances. Martha and Tom Henderson continued to live in their colonial home on Maple Street, but their backyard became a pilgrimage site for people seeking to understand humanity's first cosmic friendship. They welcomed visitors with the same generous hospitality they had shown to the entity, serving coffee and sharing stories of the night when their quiet community had become the center of humanity's awakening to its place in a universe filled with conscious caring beings. The children of Millbrook grew up knowing that their compassion had changed the course of human history, that their willingness to help a lonely being find its family had established Earth's reputation among the stars as a world capable of cosmic kindness. They carried that knowledge with humility and grace, understanding that they had been chosen not for any special abilities, but for their simple, profound capacity to recognize suffering and respond with love. The light never returned to hover above the tree line of Millbrook, but on clear nights, residents could see its new home among the stars, a constellation that pulsed gently, with the rhythm of a cosmic heartbeat, reminding humanity that somewhere in the vast universe, a family of conscious beings remembered Earth as the place where strangers had become friends, where loneliness had been answered with compassion, and where the first chapter of humanity's cosmic story had been written by children who understood that kindness knows no boundaries, not even those between worlds. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If you enjoyed this story and appreciate this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel so you won't miss upcoming videos and more fascinating stories. Until next time.